What's going on, everyone? I've been meaning to film this video for a couple of days. I wanted to take some time to not only calm down, because I know my last video was very, very angry. I also wanted to take some time to binge watch Dissociated's channel. I'm very glad I did. I saw a video that their fiance, Team Pinata, put up recently. And I'm glad I did, because now I feel more able to explain why this video is harmful. And not that you need me to explain. I'm pretty sure we all know why Trish's video was so harmful and hurtful. But I wanted to make this video also because I see, and I promise I hear, a lot of people saying we just need to ignore Trish. If we stop responding to her, she'll go away and this will all stop. And while I agree we don't need to be giving her any more attention, there is a reason that the speaking out needs to occur. There's a reason that I responded. And yes, that reason was my mother. I felt that I needed to defend her and others that truly do struggle with this. And I wanted to give you all some more insight into what my life was like with my mother growing up, and my adulthood, and my relationship with my mother. Where do I begin? First, let me say, I saw that her address to Anthony Padilla, I tweeted, "Are you mad that he didn't validate you?" I'm like, is she upset that he didn't call her or send her a DM like, "Hey, do you want to do a video about this? Like, are you mad that you didn't get the response that you wanted?" You know, I don't really have much sympathy for her because of her video and her history of trolling. It does amaze me that she has such a huge fan base, and the reason that I spoke out again in defense of my mother is because she has such a huge platform. You have people who are going to see her video and who may only have a passing, very surface level knowledge and experience of DID, and people who maybe have only gotten their information from film, from TV, from the unsavory parts of the internet and other media. And it is important for those of us who have loved ones who suffer, or who are those who deal day to day with this disorder, for their voices to be raised. And I'm glad that videos, that channels like Dissociated exist, because I watched their video response to Trisha's video and I got upset. It hurt my heart when I saw them physically react. When they got choked up, they got upset when they heard Trish refer to them as crazy. Pardon me. Because it reminded me of not only the many people who called my mother crazy, it reminded me of my father, because my father invalidated my mother's disorder almost daily. I'll be talking about him a lot in this video. Let me go ahead and give a trigger warning. There will be a mention of self-harm. There will be mention of abuse in its various forms: verbal, emotional, physical, sexual. Forgive my cat. There will be mention of very, very deep personal things. So if you are not strong enough to listen to those things, I would advise you to click off now. So let's start at the beginning. When I was in second grade, I came home from school and my mother told me she needed to talk to me. And when I came downstairs, there was all of this literature laid out on the kitchen table. And I remember one picture very vividly. I think it's the only memory I've really carried from that day, where it was a little girl in pajamas, curled up like this on her side, and she seemed to be floating above a scene. I don't remember the name of the little girl, but it said at night her brother and uncle would come and stick things in her mouth and her private parts. And my mother had a conversation saying that, explaining the literature, asking me if I had any questions about what I read. And I asked what was going on. And she told me that this is what mommy has. Mommy has multiple personality disorder, now known as dissociative identity disorder, but back in 1990, it was multiple personality disorder. She didn't tell me at the time, because I was only 8 years old, about the sexual abuse that she had suffered when she was young, which I feel was appropriate because I'm 8 years old. I might not have known not only how to deal with, I wouldn't have known how to process that. I wouldn't have had the mental capacity to process that. But that was how I learned that she had the disorder. And I remember her spending, I mentioned this in the last video, spending many, many months intermittently in psychiatric institutions. I, as a child, would go to visit her with my father, of course. I would go visit her in the psychiatric wards of hospitals. I can see in my mind now, as I remember what they look like. I remember one, there was it looked like a regular hospital lobby with chairs all facing each other and green drapes. Not that that's important, but that's the memory that's coming right now. And I remember meeting other people with this disorder, other people that my mother had befriended. I remember seeing their struggle. I remember seeing them switch in front of me. I remember one of my mother's friends who had 3 distinct personalities. One was a very young little boy, and one was a much older woman, and the core personality was a woman. And she had a son and a husband that took care of her. We went to visit her regularly. As for my mother, she had 7 distinct individuals in her mind. Several of them were littles. Littles are child alters. There was a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, I think one 17-year-old, and then a 25-year-old. And there were 2 alters that, according to my mother and her therapist, which I spent time with because there were times where my mother would take me to her sessions with her at the request of the therapist, because they wanted to make sure that I wasn't being harmed, because some of her alters were very violent. There was one who only screamed and lashed out physically. So we found that, or they found that there was an altar, 2 altars, so totaling 9, that formed after my mother married my father. My father was a narcissistic alcoholic. I stopped associating with him after the death of my mother for many reasons. And I'm better for it. My father, as I said, invalidated my mother's experience. And that's why I had such a visceral reaction and was so angered by Trisha's video, because it reminded me of my father. You know, her calling dissociated and others crazy. And then saying that she didn't. Like, what? That's what you said. Did you not watch your own video? Just the flippant taking of negative personality traits and behaviors and giving them names. That's not what it is at all. I'll answer the question because I know it's going to come up. Was I ever harmed by any of the violent altars? Yes. In my adulthood. Never in my childhood, but in my adulthood. And it took my mother a very long time to apologize. Because, not because she didn't feel remorse. It's like, and again, thank the gods for dissociated, because she said that even if an altar harms someone, it is the responsibility of the core personality to make things right. One of my mother's altars interpreted me as a threat and attempted to protect the system. And like I said, when an altar fronts, unless you have practiced and with the help of a psychiatrist, a therapist, you very rarely can be co-conscious. You will black out. You have amnesia. You don't have control over what your altar does. So when this altar interpreted me as a threat, I was hurt physically. This altar threw me around the room. And it took my mother 4 days to pick up the phone and apologize. Again, not because she didn't feel remorse, but because she couldn't understand why that altar would interpret the daughter that she loved so much as a threat. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. Because that's what it is. It's not a persona. It's not, oh, when I'm happy. Like, I've made those jokes. I've made those comments where it's like, when I talk like a baby, I'm like, no, I don't like it. When I talk like that, like, that's Desiree. That's my childlike persona. When I'm strong and confident, getting ready to go on stage, that's Taylani. But it's not like when Taylani fronts, Tay is unconscious. So I would never say that I have DID because I don't, you know. I remember being young and my father trying to describe to me the kind of hospitals my mother was in. And he's like, she's in places where, you know, where she doesn't belong. He didn't even attempt to grasp the gravity of what my mother was going through. He was like, she doesn't belong there. She's not this. She's not that. She's making excuses for her behavior. you know, she's in there with real crazy people, with people who climb the walls and walk around all day talking to themselves because they have no concept of reality. That's not what she is. And I'm like, you've been in the therapy sessions. You know, my father thought that my mother saw Trudy Chase on Oprah and decided that's what I have. And for those of you who don't know who Trudy Chase is, it was an author. She passed away in 2010. She wrote the book When Rabbit Howls, her autobiography detailing her life with as many as 99 alters living in her system. Another thing that I wanted to share with you all, because I know the question may come up, is you know, what was my childhood like? It at times was confusing because there were times where I never asked the question, who am I talking to? Is this my mom? Is this, you know? I kind of find that disrespectful. Or I did, you know. But I remember, you know, again, my mom had littles. She had child alters. And they would have discussions with me. I've had discussions with all of my mom's alters. I've had interactions with all of my mom's alters. And only that one time that I described was when any one of them hurt me. I remember being in middle school, and I had a journal, as most 13, 14-year-olds do, and I wrote out this sexual fantasy about this guy that I was interested in. And my mother went into the room, read my journal, and she came out, and speaking in a childlike voice, which let me know that that was not the core personality, she said that I was a dirty girl because I wanted to have sex with this boy. And I had to remember, as an adult in therapy, because I had because my mother passed away, there was a lot that I didn't get closure on. And my mother passed away from physical illness. She had congestive heart failure, and her heart gave out. But in therapy, I had to realize that because of the sexual abuse I knew this even before therapy, because of the sexual abuse that my mother had endured at a very young age, sex to her was repulsive. So I could never have those kind of conversations with her. Anything I knew about sex came from my sex ed classes. That's why they're so important. You know, this isn't important, but I lost my virginity when I was 18. I made a conscious decision. I was safe, but I couldn't have those conversations with my mother because it was horrible for her, and she found it repulsive. Like, even watching people kiss on TV, my mother would turn up her face and change the channel because she couldn't watch it. She couldn't watch she couldn't see depictions of sex, or even, like I said, even just kissing. And I didn't understand it when I was younger. Looking back on it now, I get it. But she didn't remember that conversation. It would come to her later in therapy, because her therapist would say, this is what this alter told me happened. And, you know, it was a lot to grasp. I remember this one's gonna get hard. So I didn't understand it at the time. I understand it now. why my mother never remembered my father punching me in the face when I was 8 years old. Okay, so here's the long and the short of it. My brother is 10 years older than me, and he had said that when he was my age, my parents would leave him alone all the time. And we lived on a military base. So my dad was trying to tell me that it was illegal for them to leave me at home by myself. They wanted to go to the store. I just wanted to stay home. I didn't want to put on my coat and go to the store. So I told him what my brother had said. I said, listen, Tony said that when he was my age, you guys used to leave him home by himself all the time. And my dad was trying to tell me that it was illegal. And you know, when you're like 8 or 9 years old, my fellow African Americans will recognize this. Your mother tells you, I'm not one of your little friends. And they have to remind you of that because you forget that you can't talk to your parents the same way you talk to your friends at school. So I decided to I wanted to stay home. So when my father was telling me that it was illegal, I put my hand on my hip and I was trying to be cute, and I was like, yeah, right. The next thing I remember is feeling blood running down my nose. I remember from my head going back and blood running down my nose and being rushed to the bathroom, which was right there. It was in the hallway that I was standing in. And my mother balling up toilet paper and pushing my head back to stop the flow of blood. I don't remember any yelling. But for years, my mother denied that happened. And I thought she was just trying to protect my father from this horrible thing. But what I realize is that standing there, and yeah, I was angry. I was angry for years. Like, how could my mother just sit there and let this man punch an 8 or 9 year old child? What I realized, and what I had to remember in therapy, was that my mother, that experience, watching that, was probably so traumatic for her that she couldn't handle it. One of her alters came to the front, and that was the one that took care of me. That's why she had no memory of it. That's why I had to tell her about that incident over and over, because one of the others had that memory. That was too much for her. So it took a lot of therapy to be able to forgive that. Because anybody else would think she thinks I'm lying. Why would I lie about something like that? I was there. It happened. But it was too much for her. Her brain wouldn't allow her to process that. And that's why alters come to be. The trauma is so great that in order to protect yourself, in order to protect itself so that life can continue moving forward, the brain splinters into these separate individuals. There were times where I saw my mother tearing at her hair. There were times where I saw my mother bang her head against a wall. There were times I saw I think the last time I saw one of my mother's altars, it was a long time because my mother was in therapy for a very long time. And there was a point where some of her altars integrated and one or two went dormant. I think the last time I saw a personality, an altar, excuse me, was when I was in my 20s. And no, it wasn't my 20s. I was still in my teens because we were still living all together. My mother and I left my father when I was 16. So they were in an argument and my mother was shaking. I remember coming downstairs and seeing her do this. She was shaking. And she banged on the table. And this was an older altar. Older in terms of the age of the altar. And she had an accent. And she spoke in broken English. And I remember her yelling at my father, saying, "Don't you know how much she loved you? Everything she'd done for you." And just yelling at him, telling him what a horrible human being he was, which he deserved. Because again, my father just, I hated the way he treated her. And I remember, like, there were times where I would see him grab her hair and, like, if one of my mother's altars had harmed themselves, he thought that that was an act of cowardice. Like, I remember he grabbed her hair and was like, "Look at that. Look at what you've done." And I attempted to call the police at 9 years old. So this video is getting long. I've been recording for almost 28 minutes. But I wanted to make this video to give you more insight into what it's like as a loved one of someone with this disorder, and to explain why we can't be silent. And yes, Trisha's a troll, but we cannot sit back and not call her out on this. Yes, it's what she wants. Yes, it's the attention she wants. And I know why she's going after Anthony, because she wants to keep the drama going. She learned from the best. She learned from Nikocado. Keep talking about somebody, like pick one person, talk them out, cause drama with them, and I'll keep my name I'll keep my name in everybody's mouth. But this is bigger than that. This affects real people. It affects the way others look at people with this disorder. It forces some into hiding and keeps them from getting the help that they need because they don't want to be labeled crazy. You have to be more compassionate and you have to be more intentional. You can stay relevant on this platform without this bullshit, without hurting people, without minimizing the struggle of others. And that's all I had to say. Thank you so much for all of the support on my last video. I was not expecting that. I was not expecting so many people to respond. I'm just this random girl with a phone, with a laptop, who had to speak out in defense of her mother. And I will continue to do so. I don't know where to go from here. This may be the last video that I make concerning this. But I'm not going anywhere. So I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, guys. This world is crazy enough. Please be good to yourselves and look out for each other. Have some fucking compassion. Please. Take care.